as dietitians, we've been interested in type 2 diabetes and type 1 diabetes for a long time. And actually, my father worked with Beston Banting, who got the Nobel Prize in relation to use of insulin, tremendously helping people with type 1 diabetes. And type 2 diabetes that so many people are coming down with in their later years or even younger, we have thought for a while was irreversible. But what's the real truth there?
Yeah, very interesting about reversibility of diabetes. So of course type 1 diabetes, which you talked about with your, fascinating about your dad working with Beston Banting. It's amazing. These people really saved millions of lives, because with type 1 diabetes, the pancreas is not producing insulin. Without insulin, you die. And so to be able to inject insulin for a person with type 1 diabetes when their pancreas is no longer functioning is absolutely critical.
So insulin helps glucose and the energy get into the cells, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's like the key that unlocks the, we often use that analogy, that unlocks the door that allows the sugar from the blood to get in, so it can provide energy for our brains and for every part of our body. And so whereas with type 2 diabetes, you've got a situation where a person is producing plenty of insulin, but the insulin is not working in their body properly. And it's called insulin resistance. And so the insulin, for some reason, it can't attach to the receptor site that kind of unlocks that door. And so what happens is the blood sugar starts to increase, and when the blood sugar starts to increase, it sends a signal to the pancreas to put out more insulin. So more and more insulin gets pumped out, but it's not working effectively. And so what happens in those cases often is that eventually the blood sugar gets to the point where the person requires some sort of assistance to get blood sugar down, and that is usually a hypoglycemic medication or insulin. And so the thinking for many years was that diabetes type 2 was an irreversible disease, just like type 1. But we've known now for several years that type 2 diabetes is most often a reversible disease. Not 100%, because in some individuals the pancreas gets damaged over time, and it just stops producing insulin over many, many years. But for most people with type 2 diabetes, it is a reversible disease. In fact, in 2009, the American Diabetes Association had a consensus statement about type 2 diabetes reversal, and it was published in the most prestigious diabetes journal that we have, called Diabetes Care, and they laid out basically the criteria for diabetes reversal. And the criteria are you have to be off all medications with normal blood glucose levels for at least a year. And so once you've achieved beyond a year, then it's considered reversal. If you've achieved that for 5 years, then it's a long-term reversal. And I've seen this many times in individuals who, I guess the question becomes, how do you
do that?
Yeah. How do you reverse type 2 diabetes? Well, diabetes is a product of a number of factors. So one of the factors is inflammation. Another factor is oxidative stress. Another factor is dysbiosis, which means unhealthy gut microbiota. These all contribute to insulin resistance. You might wonder how dysbiosis could contribute, but it actually enhances inflammation, and it can cause a lot of problems of leaking of proteins into the system, and also the increase in the production of inflammatory compounds called cytokines. And so anyway, it's a little bit complicated, but there are a couple of there's one other huge factor with type 2 diabetes, and that is called lipotoxicity. Lipotoxicity is a situation where you begin to store excess calories as fat in places other than your adipose tissue, which is where you should be storing fat. So you start to store fat in places like your liver, your pancreas, your muscles, And in those places, especially the liver and pancreas, you don't want a lot of fat there.
They get wrecked.
They get wrecked. Well, the pancreas has such a low tolerance for fat storage that it actually can destroy beta cells when it starts to store too much fat. The liver, when it stores fat, it enhances insulin resistance. And so how do you get rid of all of these drivers of insulin resistance? Well, you do that by changing the fuel that you're putting into your mouth. You need to be consuming a diet that's anti-inflammatory, that's high in antioxidants, that promotes a healthy gut flora, so that prevents dysbiosis.
So where do we get these kind of foods?
Yeah, and of course that reduces the lipid storage in the liver, which is the biggest one.
Yeah.
And so all of those things are in these foods, the fruits and vegetables, the legumes and the intact whole grains, herbs and spices are loaded with anti-inflammatory compounds, phytochemicals, and fiber. They are the only sources of fiber in the diet. And so that's what we need to focus on. And one of the things that I often tell people is, when you have a chronic disease that is destroying your body, you want to it's like a house on fire. You want to stop putting gasoline on the fire. You need to put things in your body that will put the fire out. And that's what whole food, plant-based diets do.
What would be the gasolines?
The gasolines, that's a great question, because the gasolines are things that are, are concentrated sugars, the refined carbohydrates. So when you take a food and you strip all the valuable components, the fiber, the phytochemicals, the antioxidants, and then you add a bunch of fat and sugar and salt before you eat it.
Like a donut.
As we do, like a donut, like pie, like cookies, like a lot of these processed...
In breakfast cereals.
In breakfast cereals, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's when you run into trouble. So it's not, a lot of people believe that carbohydrates are the problem. Just get rid of carbohydrates and you'll be all set. And that is a very serious mistake as far as I'm concerned, because when you remove carbohydrates, you remove plant foods, because all plant foods, the main source of energy in plant foods is carbohydrate, with the exception of nuts and seeds, which are lower. They're higher fat foods, but all vegetables, all fruits, all legumes, all whole grains, the range of calories from carbohydrates is from about 58 to 92%.
We need carbohydrates to run our brain.
We do.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you won't go far without carbohydrates.
No, we need them. And so the trick is to make sure the carbohydrates you're consuming come from whole foods, packaged with fiber and phytochemicals and antioxidants and plant sterols and stanols and all of these wonderful components that are protective to human health. And so that's the key. And so in writing this Kick Diabetes Essentials, it's a complement to our Kick Diabetes Cookbook, which provides wonderful recipes. This book also provides recipes, but a smaller number of recipes that have been very well tested by the same team we had for this book. And so in this book, we've got much more information about the steps you need to take to actually reverse this disease. So number one, if you're overweight, you need to lose excess weight. So all the tools required to accomplish that task, and then training people to reestablish a palate that will support health. And so learning to use and love whole plant foods. And so we also, one of the chapters in this book actually takes people through why plant-based versus keto, for example, which is a very high-fat, low-carbohydrate diet, and details the studies that have been done that would support the decision to go with a plant-based diet as opposed to a keto diet. One of the problems with a keto diet is it does not reverse insulin resistance, because it can actually increase lipotoxicity. And so although it flatlines your blood sugar because you're not eating carbohydrates, as soon as you start eating carbohydrates again...
Oh, your pancreas is wrecked and your liver is wrecked.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's just not a good plan. So people that really want health for many, many years, this is really the program you need to be on. A keto program, you're eating a lot of animal products and a lot of fat. And in the long term, if you look at the studies on the amount of carbohydrates people consume and mortality or risk of death from diabetes or risk of death from heart disease, we see a very clear and consistent trend. And that clear and consistent trend is the fewer carbohydrates you eat, the higher your risk of death and disability from chronic degenerative diseases. And so, but the one thing that the folks really promoting these low carbohydrate diets get right, they get right that refined carbohydrates are bad news. So when you replace meat with refined carbohydrates, you're really not much further ahead in terms of the health impact. You need to replace those products with unrefined carbohydrates. So carbohydrates from whole plant foods.
Thank you. So this is the book that Brenda Davis wrote called Kick Diabetes Essentials. And I think it's used by health professionals as well as the public.
Well, yes, and actually I'm speaking at the American College of Lifestyle Medicine next month and giving these books away to the physicians that attend that conference.
Because I think you've made these complex concepts simple and reader-friendly.
Well, thank you, Vesanto, and I learned from the best. I think Vesanto is just, you have such skills in that regard, and I've learned a lot from you over the years. Vesanto can take the most complicated, the way she does it, the most complicated scientific, theory, and make it understandable to a 5-year-old. And the way she does that is to first understand it herself.
Yeah.
And that you've really taught me. You really have to understand something to be able to explain it to.
Oh, thanks, Brenda.
Yeah, so you're the whiz on that one.
Nice.
Okay.